Bigfoot, Chapter 2, written by Dr. Matthew A. Johnson. It's titled Scared to Death. I'm Willi Rose. On Saturday, December 18th, 1999, I pulled out of Fairbanks, Alaska in a 26-foot-long U-Haul truck while pulling a 12-foot-long cargo trailer. Essentially, I was a truck driver in charge of 40-plus feet of metal, including the trailer tongue, driving down the Alaska Highway. Although it was my first winter drive, I was not worried because it was also the 8th time that I would be making the 2,500-mile drive. In my mind, the only difference was that it would be dark most of the day and 35 degrees below zero. Actually, close to 60 degrees below zero with the wind chill factored into the equation. No big deal, right? Just another day of driving in the frozen wasteland of the north. As I began my trip south to the lower 48 states, I was reminiscing about my Alaska adventures. The highlights included moving to Anchorage in 1980 on a basketball scholarship to play at the University of Alaska at Anchorage, UAA. I had the opportunity to play college basketball against some of the best teams in the country. I got half my picture in the December 1980 issue of the Sports Illustrated magazine. My silly teammate was in the way of the other half. I was able to play summer basketball in Brazil in 1981 and in Australia in 1983. I started my professional career in the mental health field in Alaska and also volunteered my time with Anchorage Youth for Christ. Also, while living in Alaska, I was able to see the entire state with the exception of the Aleutian chain. I camped, hiked, fished, and did a small amount of hunting. I pet a moose and fed it some carrots while she stuck her head inside our home. A buddy and I were chased by a grizzly bear while on a fishing adventure. I was scared to death. I followed a beautiful jet black wolf for a couple of miles on my snowmobile across a frozen lake above the Arctic Circle. I caught an 85-pound halibut and a 35-pound king salmon. I saw the coast of Russia from the north side of St. Lawrence Island while staying and speaking in Gamble, Alaska. I saw the northern lights dance around the top of Denali, the Great One. I gardened in the daylight at 2 a.m. in the morning. Although I was going to miss Alaska, I was looking forward to raising our children in the state of Oregon, where I grew up. The temperatures were milder in Oregon. There's much less snow, and the Interstate 5 corridor makes everything more accessible and closer to travel without having to buy 5 airline tickets to get there. More important of all, my children could play outside without freezing to death or being consumed by a grizzly bear in the backyard. 2 hours outside of Fairbanks, Alaska, the water pump froze in the U-Haul truck and apparently shot the fan through the radiator. I suddenly found myself stranded alongside the highway in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. It was pitch dark outside, approximately 60 degrees below zero, factoring in the wind chill, and I found myself quickly freezing to death. I had no operational engine and therefore no heat. I turned on my emergency flashers and waited for someone, as stupid as me, who would be out driving on the road in these deadly conditions. 2 hours later, I saw a car in my side view mirror approaching me from behind. I stepped out of the cab of the U-Haul truck and waved down the car. They came to a stop, rolled down the passenger window 2 inches, and asked me what the problem was. I explained my situation to them. They asked to see my U-Haul rental agreement. I dug it out of the glove compartment, and while I was handing it to them through the 2-inch opening, they said, "We have a gun." I responded by partially unzipping my coat and showing them Buddy, my miniature Sheltie, and said, "I have a dog." They didn't appear to be amused. I begged them to let me inside their car so I could warm up. They said, "Absolutely not. We don't know you. We will contact a towing company when we get into Delta Junction." I said, "But I'll freeze to death before they arrive." They responded, "That's all we're willing to do for you." I found that to be so bizarre and foreign to my experiences while living in Alaska. The rule of the road was to help others, because that could be you someday. I found myself climbing back into the cab of my truck, shivering nonstop, with my only source of heat being my little dog Buddy inside of my jacket. Another hour passed, and I found myself becoming resigned to the fact that I was most likely going to freeze to death alongside the highway. I was scared to death. I started writing a short note on a piece of paper I found on the floor inside the cab. Suddenly, I saw a pair of headlights approaching my truck from the front. I got out of my truck and started flagging down the approaching vehicle. The gentleman stopped his small pickup truck, rolled down his window, listened to my story, and immediately pulled his truck around to the backside of my truck. He told me to get inside and warm up while he placed flares and reflective triangles on the road behind my truck. He climbed back inside his small pickup truck and told me that he was an off-duty Alaska State Trooper going home from working his shift. I thanked him profusely for saving my life. He had a CB radio in his truck and radioed ahead for a tow truck to come take my U-Haul truck to Delta Junction. He also found out that the two women never called the towing company. They left me there to die. I sat in a cheap hotel for 5 days before they finally were able to rebuild the engine. I was back on the highway in the freezing cold conditions and drove all the way back to Beaver Creek in the Yukon Territory in northern Canada. I woke up the next day and drove towards Haines Junction. The U-Haul truck broke down again about an hour outside of the community. Fortunately, it happened during the daylight hours, and a trucker picked me up and took me into town. A gentleman drove me back out to the U-Haul truck and towed it back to his shop in Haines Junction. It was Christmas Eve, and I was supposed to be arriving at my parents' home in Salem, Oregon, at this moment in time. Instead, I was still 1,875 miles away from my destination. I asked the mechanic to take a peek at the engine to see if a quick fix was possible so I could get back on the road. He said no. My wife and I have a Christmas Eve party to go to. She happened to be in the shop at this time and saw the tears begin to stream down my cheeks. She said, "Come on, honey, it's Christmas Eve. Please look at the man's truck." I smiled at her and gave an appreciative nod. She smiled back. He looked under the hood for about 15 minutes and said, "You're not going anywhere. This engine is fried. There's a motel across the street, and you can stay there until we get this sorted out." I thanked him for taking the time to look at the engine, walked across the street while the snow was coming down, and checked into the motel. I spent Christmas alone in my motel room with my little dog, Buddy. It took 4 more days before the U-Haul company decided to drive in a new truck from Whitehorse in the Yukon Territory, only 96 miles away. They delivered the new truck and told me that I would have to unload the broken-down truck and reload the new truck by myself. I hired 2 local high school kids to help me during the Christmas break. Although it had snowed about a foot the night before and was about 20 degrees below zero, we managed to unload the old truck and reload the new truck before 10 p.m. that night. Those two young men were Canadian angels. I thanked them for their hard work and paid them well. The next morning, I ate breakfast at the mom-and-pop restaurant located in the motel. When I was done eating, I got my coat and gloves on, and the owners asked me, "Where are you going?" I said, "My new truck is loaded up, and I'm driving to Salem, Oregon. I should have arrived there 5 days ago." They said, "You're not going anywhere. The biggest snowstorm to hit this area in 100 years is on the way. We're going to get buried in a couple of hours." I stated, "I'm a total of 10 days behind schedule, and I'm not going to sit around for another couple of days. I'm out of here. Thank you for your kindness and hospitality." I walked out the door, climbed into the U-Haul truck, and started driving. 2 hours later, the snowstorm of the century hit. No problem. I spent 20 years driving in the snow while living in Alaska, and this wasn't any different. However, that wasn't quite the truth. In this area, I was driving through steep mountain roads with very tight curves that had 500 to 1,000-foot cliffs alongside the road without any guardrails. At one point, while I was driving around one of those sharp corners on a steep mountain road, my U-Haul truck started sliding across the other lane. Fortunately, no oncoming traffic was in the other lane. However, my U-Haul truck continued to slide toward the cliff. I literally cried out to God and asked for help. The tires on the truck finally gripped the road with about 6 inches to spare before I went over the side of the mountain. I was scared to death. I slowed down and continued driving down the highway. The Canadian snowstorm of the century encompassed the entire Yukon Territory as well as British Columbia. I plugged away at the miles until I made it to Dawson Creek, the gateway to the Alaska Highway. I checked into a hotel, ordered a pizza and beer, and celebrated the arrival of Y2K with Buddy. It was quite the party. Those miniature shelties can be major party animals. We woke up the next morning on January 1st, 2000. Apparently, the computers did not crash worldwide, and the civilization did not collapse. Therefore, I was able to pay my hotel bill with my credit card. Miracles never cease. After I paid my bill, I walked down the street to a 7-Eleven store, bought a 6-pack of Mountain Dew along with a bottle of No-Dose, consumed way too much caffeine, and drove 1,030 miles nonstop to my parents' house in Salem, Oregon. The snowstorm did not let up until I hit the border, separating the province of British Columbia from the state of Washington. After 24 hours of nonstop driving, I arrived at my parents' home, got out of the truck, walked like a zombie past everyone waiting for me in the driveway, went to the bathroom, and slept for 18 hours straight. I'm sure I looked like death warmed over. That was most definitely a U-Haul trip from hell. Little did I know what more of a traumatic experience was waiting for me in Southern Oregon. A real big, hairy deal. For the next 7 months, I busted my butt to build up my psychology private practice in Grants Pass, Oregon. I had to market and network all over town. I joined the Rotary Club. I attended a weekly luncheon meeting for pastors. I worked hard to get myself on provider panels for insurance companies. I advertised, and advertised some more. Finally, commuted back and forth from Grants Pass to Salem in order to spend the weekend with my family, only to wake up 2 mornings later and drive 200 miles south again to Grants Pass to do it all over. My wife and children needed to live with my parents until I could generate enough income to provide for our own home in Southern Oregon. My hard work paid off, and success came quickly. After school was out in June, my wife and children moved south to join me in Grants Pass, Oregon. We finally settled in, and boy, was I ready for a break. It was time to play with my wife and children. On July 1st, 2000, I found myself enjoying a beautiful Saturday in Southern Oregon with my family. My wife and I decided to take our 3 children on a tour through the Oregon Caves. We drove from Grants Pass, Oregon to the Oregon Caves National Monument Park. What a beautiful drive through Josephine County. The last 20 miles were on a very curvy road that ascended the mountain leading up to the caves. When we arrived, we ate a lunch at a picnic table in the warm sun. The kids were excited to be able to take a tour through the caves. The last time I had taken a tour through the Oregon Caves was 18 years earlier, while on a honeymoon with their mother. The tour was everything the kids had hoped it would be, except it was a lot colder than they anticipated. Once we completed the tour of the Oregon Caves, we immediately started hiking the Big Tree Loop Trail on the other side of the Visitors Center near the gift shop. Although the trail was 3.3 miles long, we didn't think it was a big deal because we had taken our young children hiking in Alaska all of the time. Actually, we were excited because we knew that we no longer needed to worry about running into grizzly bears while out in the wilderness. We could finally hike in peace. The scenery was incredibly gorgeous. We were hiking through tall trees, which were surrounded by beautiful plant life on the forest floor. The elevation of the hike is approximately 1,100 feet. The trail also crossed through meadows and ultimately brings the hiker to the widest girthed Douglas fir tree that one can find in the state of Oregon. About 1 mile up the mountain, we came across a horrid smell that was blowing down the mountainside from above our position. All 5 of us smelled the putrid odor that was as strong as a skunk, but it wasn't a skunk. The aroma most definitely grabbed hold of one's olfactory bulb and ripped it right out of one's head. We all acknowledged the pungent smell and continued hiking. It didn't concern us because we knew it most definitely wasn't a grizzly bear. Therefore, no worries. As we continued to ascend the mountain, we started hearing a strange noise paralleling our movement. It was a deep bass mammal guttural noise that sounded like whoa, 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 whoa. When we would walk, the noise was made. When we stopped, it was silent. When we walked again, the noise was made again. When we stopped, it was silent again. All 5 of us acknowledged hearing the sound. We were puzzled and could not figure out what was making the noise. We weren't scared because we knew there were no grizzly bears in Oregon. Therefore, we had nothing to worry about. After some time, the noise stopped. We weren't smelling anything or hearing anything anymore. The kids aged 5, 7, and 9 needed to take a brief break. They were doing a great job as always. I started putting 1 and 1 together in my mind, and my biological fight or flight responses kicked in. I concluded that we were being stalked by something large. I just didn't know what it was yet. I stopped my family on the trail, and I told them to stay quiet. The kids used a stick to play with a bug on the trail. I hiked up the hill to our left through the brush and trees because I had to go number 2 as soon as possible. This happens when the biological fight or flight response kicks in. While I was doing my duty, I was scanning the woods downslope on the mountain on the other side of the trail from where my family was standing. That's when I saw it. I saw it come out from behind one tree to the left and walk in an upright, bipedal manner to another tree to the right. Then it looked back and was watching my family where they were standing on the trail. My wife and kids did not know they were being watched. I've hiked through the woods in Alaska numerous times, and believe me, I know what a grizzly bear looks like, and I know what a black bear looks like. What I saw was not a grizzly bear or a black bear. What I saw actually walked upright on two legs like a human, and it was much taller than a grizzly bear or a black bear. It had to be at least 9 to 10 feet tall. What I saw was a Bigfoot, otherwise known as a Sasquatch. I pulled up my pants immediately. I literally felt the cognitive schema in my head collapse. Everything I knew about the great outdoors came crashing down. I just saw Bigfoot walk off the pages of myth and legend into reality, and I felt my brain reboot and my protective instincts kicked in. I walked fast down through the brush and trees back to the trail and got my family moving up the mountain immediately. At first, they were in no hurry to move along. I asserted myself and got them to start moving up the trail. They knew that something wasn't right because of the way I was behaving, but they didn't know what or why. I decided to move them up the trail rather than back down the trail because I sure as heck wasn't going to take my family right back through the area where the Bigfoot was spotted. At that moment, I chose not to tell my wife or children what I saw because I didn't want them to panic. The adrenaline was rushing through my body, and I was very hyper-vigilant. I was constantly looking behind us and through the woods. Although the sound had stopped, I wasn't convinced that we were out of danger yet. My heart was pounding fast, and I was scared to death. We hiked a couple 100 yards and around a switchback. When we reached a place where the kids could stop, I sat them down on a fallen log to rest and drink some water. I pulled my wife aside and told her that she wasn't going to believe what I saw. She asked me what I had seen. I told her that I saw Bigfoot, and she said, "I believe you." Of course she believed me. She had smelled the smell, and she had heard the repetitive audible cycles of whoa, 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 whoa. She knew that I wasn't crazy. She had also spent decades out in the Alaska wilderness and knew that we weren't dealing with a grizzly bear or black bear. My mind was racing as I maintained my hypervigilance. I quickly came up with a game plan. I told her to keep the kids hiking on the trail and that I would stay back about 50 feet while keeping my eyes on what was behind us. I told her that if anything came up from behind us or through the woods on the left side of us down the slope, that I would run interference to protect them. I told her that if this happened, I wanted her to run the kids along the trail. Don't stop and don't look back. We agreed not to tell the children because we didn't want to panic them. I was very frightened for my family's safety. Also, I knew that if I had to run interference on my family's behalf, that I would not last very long. What I saw was taller than an NBA player and more buff than an NFL football player. Although I stand 6 feet 9 inches tall and weigh 330 pounds, what I saw could have picked me up, crumbled me up like a wad of paper, and thrown me away. As I previously stated, the Bigfoot I saw had to be 9 to 10 feet tall. Also, I'm guessing it probably weighed somewhere near 1,000 pounds. Although the situation was tense, fortunately we never heard the sounds again, and I never saw anything after that. We finally made it to the big tree near the other end of the loop. The kids wanted to stop and check out the Douglas fir tree that had a 40-foot circumference and was approximately 800 years old. Nevertheless, we had to move them along. We finally made it out of the forest about 1.5 hours after our encounter. The longest hour and a half of my life, other than when I was freezing to death inside the U-Haul truck alongside the highway in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. At least this time I was warm. We sent the kids into the gift store to pick out a gift because we had promised to buy them something if they were good hikers and didn't complain. They were super kids. My wife and I sat on the bench outside the gift store and talked about the pros and cons of whether or not we should report what we smelled, heard, and saw. I had just worked hard for 6 months to build up my private practice. We didn't want to lose business because people would think that I was crazy. Therefore, my wife said it was up to me. I decided that I wasn't going to keep this a secret because it was real and I knew that I was sane. Also, if we had seen a black bear or cougar up on the mountainside, we would have reported it to the rangers for the safety of other hikers. Why was this sighting any different? After the decision was made, my wife went into the gift shop with the kids. I walked over to the park headquarters and reported what I saw to NPS Ranger Beverly Cherner. I sat in the chair in her office, stunned, and then I began to cry. All of the emotions that I had been stuffing due to the adrenaline began to surface now that my family and I were safe. You don't know how vulnerable I felt being so far out in the woods without the ability to protect my family in that kind of situation. Due to national park rules, I wasn't allowed to carry my handgun like I normally did while we hiked in Alaska. I gave Ranger Beverly Cherner my private practice business card, which identified myself as a licensed clinical psychologist. I told her that I was not crazy. I told her that I have 2 master's degrees and 1 doctorate degree and that I was an intelligent person. I told her that I know what I smelled, heard, and saw. I told her that I had been a resident of Alaska for 20 years with plenty of outdoor experience. In between the tears and my shaking, I told her that I saw Bigfoot. I expected her to roll her eyes and smirk at me. Instead, she said that she believed me. She said that she didn't think I was crazy. She stated, "Dr. Johnson, we're discovering new species on our planet all of the time. Anyone who thinks that we've discovered everything that is living on our planet is practicing arrogance." I found her words to be very comforting to me. I really needed to hear that. She took my story, my wife's story, and my oldest son confirmed what the noise sounded like. I was the only one who saw the Bigfoot because I had hiked up off the trail high enough to see it. The Bigfoot stood approximately 9 to 10 feet tall. It looked half human and half ape, walked upright and bipedal like a human, and had very dark hair. A mix of very dark brown and black hair. It had a protruding brow ridge and a cone-shaped head. The arms were longer proportionately when compared to the length of human arms. It took a while for the image that I saw to settle in my mind. We left the Oregon Caves National Monument Park late in the day. While we were driving back to Grants Pass, Oregon, the kids were asking what was going on. My wife said, "Oh, nothing. Daddy just saw Bigfoot." The kids went crazy in the back of the car. They responded, "What's a Bigfoot?" They pelted us with 100-mile questions. Most of their questions were left without answers. I was a newbie to the Bigfoot phenomena. I had no idea how to respond to their questions. We eventually tucked them into bed, said our nighttime prayers, and kissed them good night. Then I drove to my private practice office to type up a report while it was still fresh in my mind. After I completed typing up my report, I was very curious and started doing some exploring on the internet. I found a Bigfoot website and filed my report online. Within 48 hours, the news shot around the world about a clinical psychologist and his family running into a Bigfoot on the mountainside above the Oregon Caves National Monument Park. The Bigfoot was out of the bag. I was worried about my private practice and my future ability to provide for my family. Once again, I was scared to death. The fun was just beginning. Stay tuned. Watch for Chapter 3 of Bigfoot, a 50-year journey come full circle, written by Matthew A. Johnson. I'm Willi Rose.